The envelope was thin, a single page. Bold letters stamped across the top. Violation notice. Marcus Hale held it in his hands, staring at the words that told him his garage, the one place that gave him peace, was now in the crosshairs of his own community. To the HOA, this was routine. Another warning, another homeowner forced to bend to their will. But what they didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just a homeowner. He was something far more dangerous. And by the time the HOA realized who they were up against, it was already too late. Who exactly was Marcus Hale, and why was his garage the HOA's biggest mistake? Marcus Hale was the kind of man who slipped under the radar. Late 40s, quiet, methodical. The kind of neighbor who waved politely but never lingered long enough for small talk. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud. But in his garage, that was where his life came alive. Inside those four walls sat his tools, his collection of classic cars, and a workbench stained with decades of grease and sweat. To Marcus, this wasn't just a garage, it was his sanctuary. But to the HOA, it was a violation. They claimed the paint color didn't fit the neighborhood palette. The roofline was non-compliant. And most damning of all, they insisted the structure extended 6 inches beyond allowable space. 6 inches. That was all it took to declare war. Neighbors warned him, "Don't fight them, Marcus. Nobody wins against the HOA." And maybe they were right. But Marcus had something the HOA didn't: patience, and a secret buried deep in the county records. What secret did Marcus have that made him so calm in the face of the HOA's threats? Within days of the first letter, the HOA board sent another. This one carried sharper teeth, daily fines, the threat of a lien against his property, and tucked in the last paragraph, a chilling warning. Continued non-compliance may result in removal or demolition of the structure. Demolition. They were threatening to tear down the garage. Marcus didn't respond. He didn't call. He didn't even show up at the board meeting. Instead, he started a file. A thick, heavy folder of every letter, every email, every threat. And late at night, Marcus drove to the county courthouse, pulling dusty boxes of old deeds and survey maps from the archives. The HOA thought they were tightening the noose. But in reality, Marcus was preparing the trap. What exactly was Marcus digging for in the courthouse records? And why did he look almost satisfied when he found it? The HOA wasn't backing down. At the next community meeting, they laughed at Marcus's absence. "He's stubborn," one board member joked. "We'll break him. We always do." But Marcus wasn't broken. He was watching, waiting. Then came the unthinkable. A letter delivered not just to Marcus, but circulated to the entire neighborhood. It read, "Mr. Hale's garage will be scheduled for forced removal pending board approval. Community aesthetics and property values must be preserved." They made him an example, a public humiliation. What they didn't realize was that they'd just handed Marcus the exact opening he'd been waiting for. Why wasn't Marcus panicked? Why, when his neighbors pitied him, did he almost smile? The truth stretched back decades. Before this suburb had been neatly carved into cul-de-sacs and manicured lawns, the land was part of a vast construction project. Marcus, working back then as a young foreman, knew the developer. And when the developer's company collapsed, pieces of land were auctioned off quietly, cheaply, and without much attention. Marcus bought them, one by one, small parcels, forgotten lots, strips of land considered worthless. Except they weren't worthless. They were puzzle pieces, and together, they formed something far larger. Marcus didn't just own his house. He owned the ground under it, the alley behind it, the lot across from it. And, as the HOA was about to discover, he owned far more than that. Because with each parcel deed Marcus collected, his reach expanded, and when the dust settled, he wasn't just another homeowner at war with the HOA. He was the silent owner of an entire city block. And once Marcus revealed his hidden empire, the HOA's power would crumble. The community clubhouse smelled faintly of coffee and sweat, a mix of impatience and hostility clinging to the walls. Folding chairs scraped against the hardwood floor as residents packed into the small room, their whispers buzzing like static before a storm. On the raised platform at the front sat 5 HOA board members. Their posture was upright, stiff, confident. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you hold the final word in every argument. At the center, the board president tapped his gavel lightly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice laced with smug authority. "This meeting is now in session. Tonight, we are here to discuss the matter of Mr. Marcus Hale and his continuing refusal to comply with community standards." A ripple of whispers spread. Some smirked, others shook their heads. They were waiting for fireworks. The president leaned forward. "Despite repeated notices, Mr. Hale has refused to bring his garage into compliance. We have extended deadlines, offered warnings, and yet," he paused for emphasis, "the violation remains. This board will take whatever action is necessary to protect the integrity of our community." Scattered applause broke out. A woman in the back nodded enthusiastically. A man whispered to his wife, "Finally, they're going to deal with him." But then, the double doors at the back creaked open, and the room fell silent. Marcus walked in, slowly, deliberately. Dressed not in a suit, but in a plain button-down shirt and dark jeans. His face was unreadable, his stride steady, as if every step was measured. Under his arm, he carried a thick leather binder, the kind that looked heavy with secrets. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward. For weeks, Marcus hadn't attended a single board meeting. Rumors had swirled that he was too scared, that he had no defense, that the HOA had broken him down. But here he was, calm, unflinching, walking straight to the front row. He didn't speak, didn't argue, just sat down, placed the binder on his lap, and folded his hands. The president cleared his throat nervously, trying to regain control. "Well, since Mr. Hale has chosen to attend tonight, perhaps he'd like to offer an explanation?" For a long moment, Marcus stayed still. Then he stood. He carried the binder to the podium, the sound of its weight echoing as he set it down. He looked directly at the president, then at the crowd. His voice was low, steady, but carried a quiet authority that demanded attention. "Yes, I do have something to say, and I suggest you all listen closely, because after tonight, nothing in this neighborhood will ever be the same." Gasps rippled through the room. The president forced a laugh, trying to dismiss the tension. But Marcus had everyone's attention. What did Marcus bring in that binder, and why did the HOA members suddenly look nervous? Marcus opened the binder and began laying out documents. Crisp pages, yellowing deeds, faded survey maps, each one placed carefully, deliberately, like a chess move. "This," Marcus said, pointing to the first document, "is the original deed to my property, filed nearly 30 years ago. But it doesn't stop there. You see, there was a clerical error, one that went unnoticed for decades. And that error means my property lines extend much farther than any of you realized." The president smirked, shaking his head. "Mr. Hale, this is irrelevant. This meeting is about your garage, not about—" Marcus cut him off. "Exactly. My garage, my land, which, according to these county records, includes not just my house, but several parcels this HOA claims to regulate. A murmur ran through the crowd. People leaned closer, whispering, craning their necks to see the papers. Marcus flipped another page. His tone sharpened, serious. In fact, these records show my property includes the land beneath this very clubhouse, the playground, the tennis courts, even a stretch of the street you drive on every day. The board members stiffened. The president's smirk faltered. That's absurd. That's a note. But Marcus slid the paper forward. There, in black ink, stamped with the county seal, was the proof, challenging. Absurd? Then explain this. These aren't copies I dug up online. These are certified county records, and according to them, you've been trespassing on my land for years. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, confusion. A man near the front whispered, "Wait, does that mean the HOA doesn't actually own this block?" The president slammed his gavel. "Order! Order!" But his voice cracked under the noise. For the first time, he looked unsure. Marcus leaned in, his voice low but cutting. "You came after my garage. You tried to strip me of what's mine. But the truth is, the HOA never had power over me. In fact, it may be the other way around." The crowd buzzed louder. The board president tried to shout him down, but his authority was unraveling. And Marcus had only just begun. Had Marcus really outmaneuvered them, or did the HOA have one more card to play? That night ended in chaos. Neighbors left the clubhouse arguing, some angry, some secretly thrilled that someone had finally stood up to the board. But behind the dais, the board members huddled, their faces tight with anger, their pride wounded. They weren't going to let Marcus humiliate them, not in front of their community. By morning, a new letter appeared on Marcus's doorstep, but this time it wasn't about violations. It was about fraud. The HOA accused Marcus of falsifying documents. They claimed his proof was outdated, irrelevant, and unenforceable. But they didn't stop there. They filed an emergency injunction in county court, demanding a ruling that Marcus's deeds were invalid. In one stroke, they'd turned the tables. No longer were they the ones accused of overreach. Now it was Marcus under fire, painted as a liar, a cheat, a fraud, trying to manipulate the system. For any other homeowner, this would have been the breaking point. The pressure, the legal fees, the humiliation, enough to force anyone into surrender. But Marcus wasn't just any homeowner. Instead of panicking, he drove straight back to the courthouse, this time not to pull dusty records, but to request a certified hearing date. If the HOA wanted war, he'd give them war. But not behind closed doors, not through letters and threats, in open court, where every word would be on record. Could Marcus prove the HOA wrong in front of a judge, or was this the moment their power crushed him? As the court date drew near, whispers spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Some whispered that Marcus was a fraud, that his so-called ownership was nothing more than a desperate bluff, that he'd crumble the moment a judge asked the right question. Others whispered the opposite, that Marcus was about to pull back the curtain and expose decades of HOA corruption, illegal assessments, land grabs, money quietly funneled into the pockets of board members. No one knew what to believe, but everyone agreed on one thing. This wasn't just about a garage anymore. At night, Marcus's garage glowed with light, but he wasn't fixing cars. He was drafting statements, preparing exhibits, methodically building a case that could decide the future of the entire community. The HOA, meanwhile, grew more vicious. Anonymous notes slipped under his door. Cars idled outside his house at night. One morning, his mailbox lay ripped from the ground, wires dangling like veins. This was no longer a disagreement. It was intimidation. A message whispered through the dark, "Stop fighting, or else." But Marcus didn't scare easily, because he knew something the HOA didn't. He hadn't shown his full hand yet, and when he finally did, the board would wish they had never tried to take his garage. What final piece of evidence was Marcus hiding, and how would it bring the HOA to its knees in court? The county courthouse was a building steeped in history. Marble floors echoed every footstep, and the high ceilings seemed to swallow sound. On this particular morning, the air was charged, as though everyone inside sensed something extraordinary was about to unfold. Marcus arrived early, not in a pressed lawyer's suit, but the same simple style he always wore. Plain shirt, dark jeans, binder under his arm. Some whispered he looked unprepared, naive. Others saw quiet confidence. The HOA board members filed in next, their attorneys dragging wheeled suitcases stacked high with binders. They moved with the smugness of people convinced they were about to crush a man who dared to challenge them. When the judge entered, the gavel cracked like thunder. "This hearing is now in session." The HOA's attorney wasted no time. He stood, adjusting his tie, condescending voice dripping with condescension. "Your Honor, what we have here is a frivolous claim. Mr. Hale is attempting to mislead this community and this court with outdated, irrelevant documents. His so-called ownership of HOA land is nothing more than a desperate attempt to dodge his obligations. We ask that the court dismiss this matter immediately." The judge turned to Marcus. "Mr. Hale, you may respond." Marcus rose slowly, walked to the center, and, in a voice clear and steady, said, "Your Honor, the HOA claims I'm lying, but what I have here isn't theory, it isn't speculation, it's certified binding law, and once the truth is laid out, this board's entire authority will collapse." The courtroom shifted, a low murmur swelled. Even the judge leaned forward slightly. Marcus opened the binder, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Would the evidence hold up, or would Marcus finally be exposed as a fraud? Marcus began with the foundation, the 30-year-old deed, but this time he didn't stop at waving papers in the air. He laid it out step by step. First, the original property survey, next, the plat maps, then the chain of title, every transfer, every signature, every county seal intact. The HOA attorney interrupted, annoyed. "Objection, irrelevant." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Overruled. Continue." Marcus moved to the next layer. Here's where it gets interesting. In 1994, during a subdivision realignment, several parcels were incorrectly reclassified as HOA-managed land, but the county records never formally transferred ownership. In fact, he tapped the stamped page with his finger. "The county tax assessor has been sending bills directly to me for over 2 decades, which means not only do I own the land, but the HOA has been illegally collecting dues and fees for property they don't even control." Gasps erupted from the gallery. The judge looked startled. The HOA attorney, stuttering, stammered, flipping through his own papers. That can't be correct. There must be some error." Marcus didn't flinch. Annoyed. "There is an error. Yours." The gallery buzzed louder, voices rising. The judge banged the gavel. "Order!" But Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to the board members, sitting stiff in their chairs. His voice dropped, but carried across the room like a blade. "Annoyed. You tried to strip me of my garage, but in doing so, you exposed your own crime. For years, you've been trespassing. You've been collecting fees illegally. And unless this court recognizes the truth, every homeowner here remains a victim of your fraud." The crowd was electric. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably, realizing that if Marcus was right, they'd all been paying into a system built on a lie. Had Marcus just flipped the entire neighborhood against the HOA, or would the board find a way to discredit him? The HOA's attorney regrouped. His voice was sharp, aggressive. "Your Honor, even if these documents are genuine, property ownership is more complicated than deeds and maps. The HOA charter was filed legally, and all residents, including Mr. Hale, agreed to abide by its rules upon moving in. He is bound by those covenants, regardless of what these old papers suggest." For a moment, the board seemed to relax. A technicality, a loophole. Surely that would hold. But Marcus raised his hand. Calm, chuckle, almost smiling. "Actually, no. I never signed those covenants, and I can prove it." The attorney froze. "What?" Marcus reached into his binder and pulled out a single sheet. He walked it to the judge's bench. "This is my purchase agreement from when I bought my home. Notice what's missing? Any clause binding me to the HOA. The seller never included it, which means legally I was never under their authority. Not then, not now." The courtroom was stunned. Neighbors leaned toward each other, whispering furiously. If Marcus had never been bound by the HOA, what did that mean for everyone else? The judge studied the paper carefully, his brow furrowed. He looked up. "Mr. Hale is correct. Without a signed covenant, the HOA has no jurisdiction over his property." The attorney's face drained of color. The board members looked as though the floor had dropped out beneath them. Marcus wasn't finished. He turned slowly, looking each board member in the eye. "So tell me, why were you so desperate to take my garage? Why did you push so hard, even after I showed you the truth?" The room was silent, uncomfortable. Suspense hung thick. Marcus leaned forward. His voice was low, dangerous. "Because the garage isn't the issue, is it? It never was. You knew if anyone dug deep enough, the whole scam would unravel. And now, here we are." What hidden agenda had the HOA been protecting? By now, the board's faces were pale, tight with fear. The gallery had shifted, no longer supportive, no longer neutral. Now the neighbors looked betrayed. One man stood up. "Wait a second. Are you saying the HOA's been taking our dues illegally?" Another shouted, "Where's that money been going?" The judge raised his gavel again, but the room was unraveling. Marcus pressed forward, driving the knife deeper. "Your Honor, I request that this court not only dismiss the HOA's injunction against me, but also open an inquiry into their financial practices. If my records are correct, and they are, this board has defrauded dozens of families for years. They don't just lack power, they've abused it." The judge nodded slowly. "Motion is under consideration." The HOA attorney scrambled, desperate. "Your Honor, this is outrageous! Mr. Hale is twisting technicalities. The judge silenced him. "Enough. The evidence speaks for itself." For the first time, the mighty board sat wordless, deflated, powerless. Marcus closed his binder, looked at the crowd, then, in a final blow, said, "You wanted my garage. You thought you could intimidate me. But now, the truth is out, and every homeowner here will have to decide. Do you stand with a corrupt board, or do you stand for yourselves?" Silence, heavy. But then a ripple of applause, small at first, then growing, until the entire courtroom thundered with it. The HOA's empire had collapsed. Had Marcus truly won, or was the HOA preparing one last desperate retaliation outside the courtroom? The judge's gavel echoed one final time, and with it, the HOA's grip on power disintegrated. Neighbors streamed out of the courtroom, but the air was heavy, not with relief, but with suspicion. For years, these people had trusted the board to manage their homes, their streets, their lives, and now all of it was in question. One woman whispered as she clutched her purse tightly, "If Marcus was right, then where did all our money go?" Another voice rose, angry, trembling. "We paid for a new playground, a security patrol, landscaping contracts, but none of it ever happened. Where's the money?" The crowd turned, not on Marcus, but on the board members, who scrambled out a side door, their heads lowered, their lawyer barking orders. But Marcus didn't follow. He stayed behind, watching, waiting, because he knew this wasn't over. Had the HOA simply lost control, or had they hidden something far more dangerous than money? Back in the neighborhood, the fallout spread like wildfire. Homeowners gathered in driveways, whispering, pointing, some shouting across fences. For the first time in years, the carefully manicured image of unity was gone. A man shouted at his neighbor, "Did you know about this? Were you in on it?" Another cried out, "We trusted them, and they used us." The HOA's power had been built on silence, fear, and compliance. But now, all of it had fractured. And at the center of the storm stood Marcus. Some saw him as a hero, the man who had exposed corruption. Others saw him as a threat, someone who had pulled the rug out from under the only system they'd ever known. Late that night, a note slid under Marcus's door. No signature, just 3 words, scrawled in black ink. "You'll regret this." Who was behind the threat? A desperate board member or a neighbor who wanted the old order back? The very next morning, the HOA's offices were raided by county auditors. Boxes of documents were carried out, computers seized, rumors spread faster than facts, tens of thousands of dollars missing, secret bank accounts, shell companies set up in distant states. Neighbors, who once waved politely at each other, now demanded answers, forming their own late-night meetings in garages and kitchens. And through it all, Marcus walked quietly, binder still under his arm. He wasn't celebrating, because he knew something no one else did. The garage fight had been a distraction, a surface-level skirmish. The real battle lay underneath, in what those documents revealed about the land itself. Hidden in the old records, Marcus had found something more than just deeds and maps. He had found references to easements, mineral rights, and an old corporate name tied to the block. It suggested that what the HOA had been protecting wasn't just power, it was ownership of something far more valuable. Had Marcus stumbled into a fight over land, or something buried deep beneath it? The board members vanished from public view. Some resigned, others went silent, but whispers persisted about secret payouts, about favors granted, about powerful allies who had propped them up for years. And one night, as Marcus stood outside his garage, the garage they had tried so hard to take, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. Its tinted windows never rolled down. Its headlights cut through the dark, lingering on him for a moment too long. Then it drove away. Marcus stood still, the binder pressed tight against his chest. He had won in court. He had exposed the HOA. But he knew this wasn't the end. Because the more he uncovered, the clearer it became this wasn't just about his garage, or even his block. It was about why the HOA had fought so hard, about whom they were protecting, and about what was still hidden beneath the land. The neighborhood had shifted, the system had cracked, but the war had only just begun. They tried to seize his garage. Instead, they lost the entire block. But the real question remains, what were they hiding all along, and how far will they go to keep it buried? Marcus thought he had exposed the HOA. He thought the fight was about greed, corruption, and control. But in the days that followed, new documents emerged, papers buried in county archives, survey maps that didn't line up with the block's layout, old contracts signed by companies that hadn't existed in decades. And that's when he realized the garage was never the real prize. Late one evening, Marcus returned to the courthouse to pick up a copy of the deed. But when the clerk slid the file across the counter, something strange fell out. A thin, yellowed note attached to one of the maps. It had no date, no name, just one sentence, written in hurried, almost frantic script. "Don't dig beneath the block." What did it mean? Was it a warning or a threat? That night, Marcus spread the maps across his garage floor, tracing the old lines, the strange markings. And he saw it. A pattern buried beneath the neighborhood. Not just homes, not just lots, something larger. And as he stared at the ink-stained lines, the same black SUV rolled past his window once more, moving slower this time, watching, waiting. The HOA's corruption was only the surface. What's buried beneath could change everything. And someone will do anything to keep it hidden. The HOA didn't go quietly. They thought they could still win. They filed suit, claiming Marcus's deeds were outdated, that his rights had lapsed, that ownership of the block had defaulted to them. But Marcus was ready. For weeks he worked with lawyers, archivists, even the county records office. Every night, his garage light burned late as he spread papers across the hood of his car. Deeds, signatures, stamped seals, a lifetime of proof left behind by his uncle. Judge, firm, commanding. Present your evidence. Marcus's attorney, measured, confident. Your Honor, what the HOA has failed to disclose is that Mr. Reed's deed is not only valid, it is ironclad, recorded, notarized, and never revoked. In fact, the HOA has been operating illegally on land they never owned. He slides the documents across the bench. The judge scans them carefully, his brow furrowing. HOA chairwoman, snapping, desperate. This is absurd! He can't own everything! Judge slams gavel. Order! The court has reviewed the evidence. The deed is legitimate. Mr. Reed is the lawful owner of the entire block. The room falls silent. The HOA's power crumbles in a single sentence. Voice softens, relief in tone. For Marcus, it wasn't just a win. It was vindication. They had tried to take the one thing that mattered most to him, his garage, his sanctuary, and in their arrogance they exposed the truth that gave him power over them all. Weeks later, the HOA was formally dissolved. Fines were refunded. Neighbors who had once lived under constant fear of letters and penalties found peace for the first time in years. Mrs. Alvarez, smiling as she paints her door red again. Finally, we can live. Mr. Patterson, chuckling as his grandson leaves a bike on the lawn. Never thought I'd see this day. Measured, almost proud. Marcus didn't raise rents. He didn't punish anyone. Instead, he gave the neighborhood freedom. He restored what had been taken from them. And every evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Marcus sat in his garage, polishing the hood of his favorite car, a symbol of the fight he refused to lose. Marcus stands outside the garage as neighbors gather, laughing and talking. He takes a deep breath, looking at the quiet street now free from HOA control. Marcus, calm, resolute. They thought they could take everything from me, but all they did was remind me what was mine all along. Final line, powerful yet calm. Justice wasn't handed to Marcus Reed. He fought for it. He endured humiliation, intimidation, and threats. But in the end, the truth prevailed. His garage remained standing. His name remained on the deed. And for the first time in years, the block was finally free. At the end of it all, Marcus's fight against the HOA wasn't just about property lines or legal documents. It was about something bigger, the courage to stand firm when the odds are stacked against you. Many of us may never face an HOA, but we all face systems, people, or challenges that try to strip us of our voice, our peace, or what we've worked hard to build. Marcus's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding conflict, but from confronting it with patience, persistence, and truth. He didn't allow intimidation or corruption to silence him, and in doing so, he showed that one person standing up for what's right can change everything. So the lesson is simple. Protect what's yours, believe in your fight, and never underestimate the power of resilience. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to True Crime Dark Side, Secrets and Shadows, and turn on notifications so you never miss the stories of power, betrayal, and justice that matter. Because sometimes, the darkest shadows hide the most important truths.